Founding Director of Motivational Leadership, and delighted to be here with you today. You might notice that things aren't quite as slick as we've had before with Walter and Richard and Bob and others, and that's because the Wi-Fi has let me down this morning, and so I'm actually operating off my phone. So I'm hoping that this is going to be good quality for you, that this is still going to work for you, and we've got a plan should I completely drop out and need to rejoin. But don't let that distract you, because we've got a lot to cover in the next hour. And the way that we're going to do this is very similar to what we've done in previous webinars. And that's making sure that we get plenty of content delivered to you, lots of opportunity for you to join in. I think it's really important that you have the opportunity to put your thoughts across, but also some specific time set aside at the end for Q&A. So the subject today is leading yourself before others, and this came up from the work that the group did about what topics would be most useful for you at this time. And with the name of the company that I have, Motivational Leadership, it will be no surprise to you at all that the whole understanding of leadership for me is vital to think about at this point. It has to change; it can't stay the same. And every day we see examples of how that leadership is changing, and our expectations of leadership are changing as well. So Bob's going to drive my slides for you. So in that style that we're used to at the 5 o'clock on BBC One, I'm going to say, next slide, please, Bob. And we can go on to the next piece. Thank you. So 2 things to think about in terms of housekeeping today. One is chat. So many of you will be familiar with the chat box, you're already using it, which is great to see. So chat is there for you to be able to add commentary as you go along and really feel engaged with what we're doing today. Do make sure that it's set so that everybody can see it. I think it defaults to panelists, so hopefully you can make it so that everyone is able to see it. But if not, rest assured the panelists are seeing, and Bob is taking the very important role today of making sure that he can see what's going on in chat and Q&A, and we'll be feeding that in as we go through. So Bob will be adding that in. We also have Q&A, so there's a different place where you can put your Q&A. The reason we separate that is that the chat can just disappear. If you're a very active group, and I don't know you yet, if you're a very active group, then actually, the chat just disappears fairly quickly, whereas the Q&A, we can start capturing those and we can use those either as we go through, but more likely at the end. Special offers, that's what we do, is we make sure that there's a reason why we keep you till the end. We really want you to get the full experience of what we want to share. And so we want you to stay to the end. So those people who do stay to the very end, there will be some special offers that are being made to you, and they are of good value and very much to your benefit. So looking forward to sharing those with you later. So as we move on and start thinking then about what we're going to be covering today, on our next slide, please. Aims for today. I don't know about you, I was just saying this before we started the call, that this time that we find ourselves in, some people are finding they've got more time, that somehow they're able to carve out more time, that pace is different somehow, or that we have the alternative happening where people are just so busy, they've got so much on the plate, they're working longer hours and more frantically, it seems, than ever before. What I want you to do in this hour together, you've already decided to put it in your diary, you've already decided to be here and show up. I want you to have this hour as a space to think. I really want you to be able to engage with what we share with you today, to really think about your own leadership, and you'll see later I'll be describing what I think leadership is. And even if you've got a little gremlin sat on your shoulder right now saying, well, I'm not a leader, which I can't imagine that many of you are, but if you do have that little gremlin sitting there saying that you're not a leader, believe me, you are, and I would love you to take that space to think. And I want you to be thinking as we go through today about how your leadership is changing. It has to be changing. The situation we're in is going to mean that what leadership is going to be changing, as I say. And there's something about being a leader and doing a leader, isn't there? So the doing of being and being, they're very separate aspects. And I want you to think about actually how it feels to be a leader. I'd also like you to start thinking about what is, and I'm going to take you through an exercise later, about what are you doing right now that is enabling you to be a leader as you want to be right now, but also what's getting in your way. So what's propelling you forward and what's holding you back. And I've got a little formula for you to be able to diagnose that later, and maybe take away and start using that, not just in your leadership role at work, but in all aspects where you show up. And of course, what I want you to do is recognize, and this is partly where this the whole theme of this webinar comes from, is to recognize that it starts with you, but it must then emanate outwards. It is so important that you are able to be a leader of you yourself, and then can share this to build greater leadership within your team. So without further ado, let's get started on achieving these aims today. So next slide, please. So this is me. This is me in full flow in a group. And my background, just to give you a sense of who on earth I am, is that I've been working around leadership teams for nearly 20 years now. I work across many sectors, so a lot of charities, a lot of SMEs are my background, but I also go into corporate. So what I love is the fact that no matter where you show up with people, it seems to be very similar themes that keep emerging. And what I've noticed through the time that I've been working with leadership teams is that, of course, they transform. You have to make sure that obviously the time that you're working with people, that they are indeed reaching their objectives. But what's happened for me in recent times is the realization that leadership itself needs to change. So whereas before I might have been, if you like, being held to account of what leadership was based on old ideas, now I'm coming up with my own ideas about what leadership is, and I'm very much being influenced, of course, by the new thought leaders that are out there that are making us think very differently about what leadership is. So I'm very much bringing that into my work now. And you know, for me, what I've seen in leadership is that it's not easy. It is not easy. And I also recognize that if we're going to sustain good leadership in this country and beyond, then we need to do it differently. We can't keep pushing through and digging deep. We have to change that. And so perhaps not surprisingly, again, given the name of the company, that motivation for me is glued to leadership. Those two actually should never be pulled apart, but for far too long we have allowed leadership to happen without that internal drive of motivation. So for me, when people love what they do, when they are really centered in understanding why they do what they do, they totally understand their motivations, that's what can sustain them. And when they're in that place, you get into that place of flow, don't you? And therefore you're able to do your work so much better. So my aim, if you like, for all people, but particularly leaders, is to get people loving what they do, falling back in love with their role of leadership, because then they're going to do it so much better. So I'm wondering how you're feeling about that. By all means, start putting some things in chat if you're sort of thinking, yeah, that's what I want, or that's what I feel, or if that's just not you at the moment, then you know, it's really about where are you at the moment. So next slide, please. Steve Jobs, love him or hate him, did say some quite useful things, and one of them I think is this one. I really like the idea that at this point in time today, you can make sense of all of the things that you've done in the past and align that to enable you to be who you are today. If I had, you know, when I was doing my degree at Warwick, doing history and politics, if I had thought at that point that I would be here doing what I do, having just written a book that's you know, done really well with Amazon, I wouldn't have thought that, because I wouldn't imagine the path forwards. But right now I can see the relevance of that history and politics degree. I can understand, you know, what I've done in terms of the organizations that I've worked with. So an exercise that you can do that I would really encourage you to do after today is to start just jotting down your thoughts about what's led you to here. What are the big things that have happened in your life, not just work things, that have led and become your path to the leader that you are today? Because when we do that, we're able to claim some of those things that maybe we take for granted about who we are and why we do what we do. There'll be themes that emerge. So it's a really nice exercise to do, and it can certainly help broaden your idea of how you're a leader. what I've recognised is that certainly before COVID, actually, in looking at how leaders were showing up, I was going into organisations and people were just exhausted. So next slide, please. People were just exhausted. They were going through this cycle that I'll explain to you in a moment. But what I was seeing was people that would show up, pushing through, digging deep, as I say. They would be very much aligned to what had to be done, so targets that were very much driven by the organisation, and they were also pushing their team. And any of you know that are responsible for any group of people actually is, you know, trying to get people to do things when their hearts aren't in it, let alone your own. It's really hard. And so what I was finding is that a lot of leaders that I was working with felt that it was almost acceptable that they would just go at the end of the day and glug a few glasses of wine. It became just like normal for them, or they'd be binging on food, or that actually how they felt about their families, their own mental health, you know, it was just sort of part of the course, that somehow, you know, they could recover through doing those activities at the weekend or in the evenings. That's not recovery, is it? It's actually filling up those needs that are lacking. So you're not having enough sleep, not having enough stimulation at work, not having enough feedback, not feeling good about what you do. It's filling up that lack of your needs being met with other things that become bad habits. And I've noticed that time and time and time again with the people that I was working with. Their jobs were brilliant. What they were able to achieve was mind-boggling. But the personal cost to them, well, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. I wonder how that's changing through the situation we're in at the moment, and I'm going to invite you to share that in a moment. Next slide, please. So what I've come up with is something that I've called the depletion cycle, and it's this idea that, if we start at the top here, that a lot of people actually feel fairly unfulfilled at work. And when we know the engagement figures, actually prior to COVID, they've recently slightly gone up, but the COVID pre-COVID figures were 13% of people were actively engaged at work. That's an awful lot of people, perhaps yourself included, who just aren't fulfilled by the work that you do. And when that's happening, when you really don't feel like you're working on purpose, then you become disengaged with that work, and that disengagement carries on through into your home life. And that's where I was starting to see people actually buying stuff or doing stuff that cost money, and therefore needed to go back to work in order to make the money in order to pay for those things. It becomes a cycle. There's many different versions of that. So I would love, in the next slide, I'm asking you the question of, you know, what does your depletion look like right now? Is there any aspect of what you're noticing about where you're using up energy and you're not replenishing it in a particularly good way? So I'm going to leave you to put some chat in there, which Bob can share with the group, of what's in your depletion cycle right now. What might it be? What bad habits have you got into, if any? You may not have done, if any, during this recent time. What thoughts do you have so far?
Got some going in now.
Great.
We have food treats after a long day on Zoom, working late into the evening, procrastination. So true, this finds me out, waking up late, drinking more, procrastination. Lack of time for me is a big issue, leading to difficulty in finishing work and being exhausted by the time I get home. Negativity from teammates and others, adding in things like procrastination. Overlooking the importance of planning is coming up.
Carving up.
Well,
you know, it's interesting, and thank you, Bob. I find it interesting. I was actually talking last night to somebody, and I was saying that how difficult it is to get hold of flour, and you know, is this part of what we're seeing here? You know, I saw on there making cakes, carving up, whatever. I don't know whether it's all part of the same thing, but what you're describing, I absolutely get. We've got less of a divide now for those people that are obviously working from home between what we see as work and what we see as home. There's much less of that divide, and so we allow one to move into the others. Our boundaries are moved, and a lot of people won't have reset those boundaries. They won't have actually, you know, said out loud to perhaps the people that they work with in their house, this is my work time, and during this time this is what needs to happen, versus to their work colleagues, the evenings are my family time. For example, I'm finding a lot more people working in the evening because other people find that's the best time to work because they've got kids or other responsibilities. It has to be agreed. But the point is that this is all, if it doesn't suit you, if you start finding it ebbing away at your energy, and you've only got so many reserves, haven't you? You've only got so much energy left. So we need to be able to think about and stop in its tracks those things that are stopping us from being able to be as effective and energized in what we do as we can. So what we're going to go on to today, we'll start giving you some ideas on that. But just noticing it is a great place. And then setting out boundaries is a great second place to go to. Brilliant, thank you. So next slide, please. What I find really interesting is that you know, we work for 40 hours a week, 40 weeks a year, probably a little bit more, maybe 40 years of our lives. That adds up to 64,000 hours, which is a mind-boggling number. So for me, going back to that, I think it's an American quiz show back in the 60s, $64,000 question for me is about how do we change the world of work so that it's good for people and good for business. At the moment, it seems that it is often good for one or the other and not both. And I love the fact that in the last maybe up to 5 years, we've had that emerging sense of purpose and profit, but it's still not getting the traction that it needs to. And I think that's going to change through what's happening here, where we get this blurring of lines between work and home. I think we're going to get a blurring, quite rightly, a blurring of lines on the humanity of work. And I think that's what we need to be looking at now, is understanding how we can get both purpose within an organization, that we align to what individuals really can contribute and really fully showing up, that's good for them, that makes them feel motivated and alive, as well as profit, and that one doesn't cost the other. And you know, those organizations that have been very purpose-led, you know, the way they often think about profit is that's what sustains them. You know, they can make more of a difference, they can lead more on purpose by having profit too. It's not something they can afford to be without. And likewise, you know, it just having businesses that are all about the numbers and about driving to targets and outcomes isn't good in terms of capturing hearts and minds. So that's a question that I'd like to leave you with as we go on to the next slide. And for me, as I said earlier, this is about creating your space to grow. So if you're going into this webinar thinking I need to add more things in, that actually as we go through the content that I'll share with you today, it's another thing to add to the to-do list, the growing list of things that you must do in order to be a good leader. That's not going to work, because that would be like putting more saplings in, more seedlings in together. And we know that when that happens, that they're not able to flourish. So this is about consciously deciding actually what are the few things, or one or two things you're going to focus on, and do that well in the time that you focus on your leadership in the time ahead. So it's not about crowding the area, it's about getting that space to grow, because growth for me is such an important aspect of leadership. Next slide, please. So, as I've said at least 3 times already, I do believe we need to shift the definition of leadership. So in the chat, I would like you to share, what are some of you may have an actual quote around leadership, you know, a definition that you love and you live by, or it might just be a few words that define leadership for you. I'd love you to share that in the chat box. What's your definition of leadership? Just write that in the chat. So I'm seeing some come through. Yeah, they're great. Go for it, Bob.
Leading teams, not team leaders. You must become the change you wish to see in the world. Yes. Mahatma Gandhi. Practice what you preach. Sharing knowledge, having a vision, leading by example, removing barriers to enable others to deliver a shared vision. Be worth following. Empowering, enabling teams to deliver, learn and grow. Doing the right thing. helping teams to grow beyond their expectations, modeling best practice, place the flag and walk the talk.
That's nice.
This is not final. Failure is not final. It is the courage to continue that counts. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Wow. Showing the way and inspiring others, leading with compassion. We've got some great contributions.
Some brilliant contributions. I'm seeing some familiar names in there as well, which is fabulous. Really, and it gives a sense, you know, when you hear those words and you let them land on you, when you really feel into the emotion of those words. I mean, the first one that I saw come through, you know, that distinction between team leader and leading teams, it just changes the orientation in which you're looking. The idea that you can lead with compassion, you know, that's very different language, isn't it? You know, if you think about how leadership has looked in the past, admittedly some of it is from a while ago, but we see that definition of leadership show up on our televisions every day at the moment. You know, we see people from all walks of the political landscape showing up in their leadership. And I'd again just invite you to be thinking about what sort of leadership do you want to be seeing from those people around you? What sort of leadership do you want to see in your families, because they're the people you're spending most time with? What sort of leadership do you want to be seeing in the people around you at work? It doesn't need to be what it used to be. It is a chance to start changing it. So I'm going to share with you a few definitions of leadership. So we've got 3 coming up for you. The first one, if you may be familiar with these, the next slide please. The first of these definitions is by Kevin Cashman. And you'll see that this is about, it's a really wide definition. So if you just keep scrolling through, Bob, you'll see them. So this is about really wide definition of leadership, about anybody that's self-expressing, who's adding value. That's the critical piece for me here. Anybody that is showing up to add value is a leader. I love that. The second one is Robin Sharma, a great book, Leader Who Had No Title. And it's the idea that it's not about your position. Leadership cannot be about your position. Again, you know, just look at the last few days and what's been happening in political spheres. You know, who are you seeing as a leader? It doesn't matter what your political bent is. What is you know, who's the more being a leader through their actions? It's not their title. They've all got important titles. It's how they're showing up. And then the last one that we have on here is a really old one, but I like it because I think it adds to that point about motivation being so important. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you're a leader. And that's the point, because your role is to enable, I believe, to enable others to step into their greatness. It's not about the light shining on you. So my definition of leadership, which is on the next slide, is very inclusive. It's saying that it's a daily practice. It's not something that just you do it once and it's done. It's something that takes practice, and it's taking responsibility for oneself. And this is so critical, that we are able to admit our mistakes, that we're able to show up vulnerable, as vulnerable as we need to, but we show up fully, that we're not sort of hiding parts of ourselves. We recognize ourselves warts and all in order to fully be our type of leader. Who are we? We're all different. Who are we? And we are committed to continuing to grow whilst enabling others to do the same. So this is my definition of leadership. It's one that I've used for a while now, because for me it is about recognizing that leadership is not the preserve of the few. It is in the actions of the many. And I hope that you can see that this definition helps contribute towards that discussion. So on the next slide, there's an exercise that you could do in your own time. You'll be able to access these slides afterwards through the recording. It's also on some resources that I'm going to be sharing at the end, free resources at the end of the webinar, so you'll be able to see this. And it's just a simple idea of breaking down that definition and thinking about, actually, how am I demonstrating this aspect right now? How am I seeing this in others? And what are my reflections about what I've written down? It's a very simple way of doing it, but it certainly starts making you think about actually how you are being right now in your leadership. So something for you to take away. My next slide, please. I think it is so important, and it goes back to that point of daily practice, that you are deliberate. how many of you today, will just turn up to things? You may have a call after this one where you're grab yourself a coffee and just turn up. Actually, if you were being deliberate, you would take a few moments, even sometimes just a few seconds, to be deliberate in your space of leadership and really think about your contribution to that meeting, that conversation, that discussion. So, a mantra that I have is about being deliberate, and I'd encourage you to do more of that as you go through your day to day, and just notice how that changes your version of you. So looking at our next slide, I would like to now move our attention to thinking about performance. So how do we, perform as a leader? And for me, there's 3 ingredients that make up performance, any performance. So 3 ingredients. So what do you think those 3 ingredients might be? What do you think those 3 ingredients might be that are components of performance you must have? So I can see some coming through already. So having plans and clear actions. We're seeing energy, feedback loops, having a target to go for, having integrity, which I guess is a value. And in fact, there's a few coming through now which are about values. So it's the way
Humble
in which you go.
Yeah,
that's nice, isn't it? Humble and hungry and smart.
Right. Yeah.
So as I'm seeing those come through, they fit into the categories that we're talking about. So if we go on to the next slide, what we'll see is that for me, you'll notice that I like triangles, and I put this into something that I call the performance triangle. So if we start at the top of this performance triangle, many of you talked in the chat there about having a target or a goal, and that is critical. You need to know what directions, it's the what that we're going towards. So it's vital, and we've done this for years. It's not new. In businesses, we know we need to have vision and we need to have goals. We need to know which direction of travel that we're going in. Is it going left or is it going right? But it needs to be really clear and specific, because if we use the analogy of a journey and we said, right, the direction we're going to is Newcastle, it's not good enough to just know it's Newcastle, because actually, if we all set out for Newcastle, we're not going to end up in the same place, because some of us will end up at the station, other people will end up in a road that they know. So it's about being really specific. So we need to get that skill of specificity in place as well, but actually knowing what direction, and knowing that it's about making sure that everybody understands that goal from their perspective. You need to give the team an opportunity to say, well, Newcastle, is that the one up north, or is that the one down south? And you need to know where they're coming from to know whether it's up north or down south from where they are. So it's a real clarity around that what, but there's nothing new in there. We know this is needed. Also on the left-hand side here, we've got the how. So we're, again, very used to thinking about how are we going to achieve that? What are the skills and the behaviours that enable us to contribute towards that outcome? And thinking about that, for me, skills and behaviours are all learnable. So there's no excuse to sort of say, oh, I'm not that type of person. I find it difficult to plan, or I find it difficult to build relationships. They're not my the behaviours. Actually, you need to be understanding, well, how could this outcome, these results, be achieved? What are the skills that are needed? So it's best to look at the whole picture first, and then look at, what are my skills? What are my behaviors? What am I just brilliant at? That actually means that I'm going to find it easier to go in that direction. So you look at the bigger picture first in terms of skills and behaviors to make sure you're not missing anything. You're not just going down old ways of working. And then you check in on your uniqueness of what you are. So things in terms of behaviors, go and do an insights profile, go and do a Myers-Briggs profile to help get some language around that, so you can understand what comes easier in terms of your behavior. But I'd say nothing new in here. We know the what, we know the how, those two things come together. What I think is new, or certainly something that's bringing it into sharp focus, is by adding in the why bother. And it's about recognizing that nothing gets done without energy, without the motivation. And therefore, we need to understand what are the drivers that we as leaders have that enable our skills to come alive. put simply, if you tell me that I need to, over the next year, set out 90-day plans and 30-day cycles, and that you can come up with all of the skills and behaviors that really will enable me to be successful in my business, I won't do it unless I want to. I might do it once. But it's about, well, what's in it for me? So if I understand my motivators, if I understand what's in it for me, then I will start to engage with those behaviors, and they'll start to give me energy rather than costing me energy. Likewise, I need to have a connection between my motivation and the direction of travel. If I don't believe in my business being the way that it is, and it's my business, I guess it's going to be aligned. But if people were telling me, and people have done this over the years, if people are telling me the way you grow your business, Kate, is by having hordes of associates, and you need to work in that way. If I'm not wanting to do that, funny enough, I don't do it. So it's about making sure that the what is aligned to the why bother, so you get engagement, and that the why bother is connected to the how, because that's where you get your talents really singing. So playing with this is so important. It's something we'll keep coming back to. So next slide, please. And a great way of being able to look at your own leadership is through three further questions. So next slide, please, Bob. The first question is about your what. And so what I'm going to suggest that you do, maybe now if you're quick thinking, or if you want to go and reflect on it later, is to be thinking about, in the current situation that you are in today, what results are you getting that are positive? So thinking about that, you might go back to, in terms of how your work is, in terms of the whole work setup that you've got right now, what results are you getting that are positive? Are you being quite productive? Are you reaching your deadlines? Are you, what are the outcomes, results, and impact that you're having that are positive today? So answering those questions first. The second question, so if you just go forward, is around behaviours. So looking at the outcomes that you've achieved, what are the behaviours that have enabled that? So what are you doing, in other words? Because behaviour is simply what you do and what you say. Simple as that. It's a big word, but it's actually what you do and what you say. So what are you doing and what are you saying that are enabling those outcomes that you are getting? Just break it down in those terms, because in doing that, you'll start to notice how you're bringing this about. You'll start to notice the contribution that you are making towards it. So you can start taking responsibility for that as well, and recognize, remember, this is the positive view, because you're getting positive outcomes. The way, that me actually setting some boundaries around my working day is actually bringing around positive outcomes. So I'm going to keep setting boundaries. Or it might be that making sure that I go for a walk before I start work, so that I can clear my head of the family stuff and come into my office head first. That's what's getting the positive results. I'm really productive when I've had my morning walk. They're simple examples, but hopefully will give you what you're looking for in terms of some of the answers here. So that's the second point. The third point is what's driving this. So why are you going for that morning walk? Why are you setting those boundaries? What's in it for you? And it might be because you're motivated by freedom, and you just love to be able to have that, wipe the slate clean walk that you can have early morning, so that you can come into work refreshed and ready to do your thinking. Or it might be that if you set boundaries, then you're safe and secure, motivation, safe and secure in knowing what you can achieve during that time. So really knowing your motivators is so important, and we just don't talk about this stuff at work enough, do we? We analyze people to death through fabulous psychometrics, I have to say. I mean, I love the ones that I mentioned earlier, but they don't tell you about your motivation, because your motivation changes all the time. So we need a language around motivation. So in the free resources that we'll share with you later, you can start to unpick what your motivation is. We're also going to do a giveaway, so you can specifically identify your motivation through another tool that will only take 10 minutes to complete, and it is brilliant in giving you language around what drives you. So this is the performance triangle, and these questions that you have on here will help you understand what is it that's driving your success today, and you can use it in any aspect of life that you're facing right now. Let's go on to the next slide, because I'm realistic that actually you'll be getting some results that you're just not happy about right now. Is it just me, or is it true? You know, it's really hard right now being a leader. It's really hard being a leader in my family. It's really hard being a leader in so many different aspects that I'm needing to show up. So I need to look at what are the results that I'm getting that are less than positive. So this is the downward or the inverted triangle that I talk about. What are the results that I'm getting that are less than positive? You know, the fact that, you know, maybe at the end of the day, I'm just so tired, or maybe it's I'm just not getting to do the creative work that I want to be doing, that really immersive creative work that actually makes my heart sing. Once I've identified what the results that I'm getting, I can then look at, well, what are the behaviors that are contributing to this? In a way, it's sort of how am I sabotaging myself, but it's wider than that. So what are the behaviors that I'm doing, because it's me doing it, that are contributing to that? And maybe it's because I'm not having enough breaks. Maybe it's because I've not set those boundaries. So it's thinking about, well, what am I doing instead? It's very easy to say what you're not doing. Look at what you are doing. So I'm choosing to work through. I'm choosing to put you know, the family first at lunchtime rather than me, when actually I could, you know, so I sit down with them rather than perhaps going out and enjoying the fresh air. So think about what are you doing that contributes to this negative outcome that you're receiving, and then look at what's driving this. Understand how it's almost secondary gain, actually. You know, how this behaviour is coming from you. You're choosing to do these things, but you're doing it to negative impact. This slide contains, so it's a real jewel in terms of being able to start really understanding what's driving your success and what's driving those things that are less than successful for you right now. And as I say, I'd apply it to so many areas. So I just encourage you to be thinking about those as we go through. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to quickly walk you through is my CREATE model. So as you can see, it's an acronym that sits here, and it's the title of the book that, again, I'll reference later, because there's free resources that you can use and help you along the work that we're doing here together. We're very used to, aren't we, you know, setting out your goals and thinking of how you need to achieve them. For me, CREATE is about creating that space. It's the work that if you do it now, it'll give you that gap between where you are now, where you want to be, that you can step into as a leader and show up differently. So next slide, please. This is where you get to see my brilliant drawing. I was going to get a beautiful picture of mountains, but I think I'd just be upset because I didn't get to go to the mountains this year. So I just thought a drawing would be just as good. So this, the analogy that I use here is that it's very easy as anybody, as a leader, or just as you, to sort of think, well, this is me, this is who I am. I'm just that person that, you know, the same person as 20 years ago. That's not true. You are different today because of the skills and behavior, experience and knowledge that you have built over the last X years. So as you started to climb the current mountain on which you stand, as you started to climb it, you put things in that rucksack, you put those skills and experience in. And as you climbed up that mountain, you might have taken out a few of the books and a few of the bits of knowledge you didn't need, but you'll have put in more experience and skills. So by the time you get to the top, at the apex of that mountain, you are now a different person. If you like, there's different things in your rucksack, your toolkit, and that's who we need you to get to grips with right now. And a really simple way of doing this is to ask yourself questions about the what, how, and why bother. You know, what are the outcomes that I've achieved? What does good look like to me now? What are the skills and behaviours that I really rely on right now? What do other people look to me as a leader? And on the motivation, what motivates me right now? So in other words, if you just use that model of what, how, and why bother, but think of it today, in May, in 2020, who are you today? That's your current reality piece done. And then we can then move on to the next slide and the next piece of the acronym, to Envision. So going on with the mountain scene, you know, you're at the top of the mountain that you set out to climb. You're here, and then suddenly you can see beyond you this beautiful vista of mountains that all represent different opportunities and will lead to different versions of you. If you choose to climb that mountain over there, maybe you'll learn those skills and encounter those experiences. Whereas if you go in this direction, you'll show up differently. You know that. It's like sliding doors. There'll be different versions of you showing up in the future. Perhaps they do in a different universe. But what I'm encouraging you to do is, from this place of current reality today, knowing what you know about yourself, look to the future, envision who you want to be, what outcomes, so listen to the language again, what you want to be achieving. So it's the what of the triangle. What do you want to be achieving? What impacts and results do you want to have? Secondly, what skills and behaviors could get you there? And thirdly, what's your motivation for doing that? Why are you bothering? Why is that top of that mountain so appealing to you? And again, it's that combination of questions that sit around the performance triangle that will help you envision a future that is different to today. And I would suggest in doing this that you just look 6 months ahead, because I don't know about you, I don't know where things are going to be beyond that. But if I know what impact and results I want to have, let's say in my business in 6 months' time, then I've got a direction of travel. If I then think about the skills and behavior that I need to focus on to turn up the volume on, and maybe there's some behaviors I need to turn down the volume on in order for me to get there, then I'm focusing the little time that I have to make that happen. And I need to tune into my motivation to make sure that this is going to energize me, that I'm going to love what I do rather than it being a slog, because I want to get to that mountain and be jumping for joy. So that's the envision stage. The next stage is about aligning this. So, you can see that the what, how, why, bother model all sits within each other. So you as an individual can sit in there and think, this is what I want to achieve. This is the outcomes that I want to have, but it needs to align to your team. So think about that team. So that might be your peer group, it might be your industry, whatever. So whoever you see as your team or organization. So just make sure there's alignment in there, so that you're not sort of, if you are going in a completely different direction to your team, that tells you something, doesn't it? Maybe it's time you joined a different team, or maybe it's about getting your team back in alignment with where you're going because things have changed. So this is a really simple model to sort of think, are we aligned? We're used to doing it on the what, aligning, we have that, we do appraisals and what have you, think about, aligning the what. Here I'm suggesting we align the how and the why bother as well. The next point is about testing out. So, often you're at this point, you're revving the engine, you want to get going, you know where you're going, you've got the skills, you just want to, let me go. But actually, it's very important to make sure that you look at the enablers on this journey. So what are the things that could come up in the next 6 months that could really help you get real traction on this journey that you're going ahead with? So what could be things that make it easier for you? So make sure you take advantage of them. So just brainstorm what those enablers might be in the next 6 months. But also look at the barriers. What are the obstacles that might come up along this journey? That think about them now, because today, in doing the work, or whenever you get a chance to do this work, you are going to be feeling really motivated and therefore most resourceful about being able to achieve what you want to achieve in the next 6 months. So if you think today in that resourceful brain of yours, well, if that barrier comes up, I can get round it by, that's the time to do it. Because if you leave it until it actually comes up, you're not going to be in the headspace to do it. So it's thinking ahead of time and testing out what's going to enable you to succeed and what might get in the way and how you can work around it right now. So the last piece of that, the E in create, is about engaging, because you can't do this alone. Leadership and actually doing any task always involves other people. So this is about, well, how do I engage other people in this journey? Partly because it holds you to account, but also because it means that you've got your team working with you. So it's about setting out your stall to your team. It's about getting people to recognize that you've done this work, and how you're going to show up as a leader in the next 6 months might be different to how they've experienced before. And it needs to sound genuine and aligned to a version of them that they get, but you're updating them to your new version of you. So what you're going to be focusing on, what's no longer important to you. So you set your stall out in that way. And because we want this to be a shared experience, you're also sharing with them how you got to this outcome, how you've done this thinking. So you share with them some of the ideas that we have here. You can do it as team sessions and all sorts of things, to get them on board with where you're going, but in turn get them to be thinking about what they want to achieve. And then we're all engaged and aligned together. So that's the create model that I've whisked through, that you'll be able to see. And my sort of closing thoughts around this is, who would have thought 6 months ago that we would be achieving what we are today? In your own leadership, would you have thought that you'd be showing up in the way that you are today versus 6 months ago? So it is those small changes, that 1 or 2 degrees of change, that have huge ripple effects on the versions of you tomorrow and the impact that you can have tomorrow. So I'm not saying sweeping changes needed to your behaviour right now. It's the small things you choose. And I'm hoping that's encouraging. Because what I want to see, and in the next slide, you'll see that my big mission, my big driving force for my business is to shift the paradigm around motivation and leadership in the workplace. For me, the time is now to start really combining those 2 elements and to question actually how we engage people in this conversation. Next slide, please. So we're going to open up to Q&A. So should we go back one step, actually? In terms of Q&A, I've chatted with you for quite long enough, and I'd love to hear your questions on anything that we've covered here. So if you in the Q&A box can write your questions in, then Bob will feed those through and we'll be able to answer those. I'm hoping that you've got some good juicy ones so that we can start thinking and really sharing practical things about how you bring this into action. Maybe I know when this is a sort of one directional chat, it can feel a bit presentation-y, but this stuff works. I've been using it for years and I can see that some of my clients are on the call, so I'm hoping that they will be testament to that. It's really important to make sure that you take each of these stages and do them justice. That's where the work is. It's not just in reading these questions, it's in doing the work.
Kate,
yes.
I have a question for you.
Fab.
We have some questions coming in. So what's going to help me build and sustain the trust with so many of my people working from home?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because my experience is that a lot of people were reluctant to have their teams work from home before COVID because they didn't know whether they'd actually get on with their work. And so trust sort of didn't exist at the levels it needed to in that relationship. And that's been blown out of the water because people now just need to work from home. And there's something quite interesting about trust, is that sometimes it's just about trusting. It's in the action of it, it's in the verb of it, it's trusting. And it's about thinking, so if you have in that question, there's an implication of, how do I build trust? So it's something that needs work. Exactly that. So think about, well, what would I need to be doing in order for people to trust me? So what are the behaviors that I need to be exhibiting in order for people to trust me? Maybe it's me sharing where I'm up to with work a bit more regularly. Maybe it's simply showing my video on when I'm on Zoom calls. So rather than some people sort of feeling like they're sort of hiding away behind a screen, actually just showing up and being fully present on video. So think about, what are the behaviors that demonstrate trust? So being seen, checking in, being a bit vulnerable actually in terms of what you're sharing. And when you show that trust, so it comes from you first, then you have permission from other people to sort of hold you to account for that, which I think is important. But it's leading the way, isn't it? So show it from yourself first, and as other people do it, catch them doing it right. So as you notice more people turning their videos on, oh, it's great to see you, it's so nice to see your shiny face on the screen today, it builds real connection. Or I loved it that I know you're not finished on the project yet, but you've given me check-ins every day on where you are. That really helps me, because it helps me understand what I need to do to contribute to the project as well. So you catch people doing things right as well, and it will come. It's a daily practice. You level, layer upon level with trust.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got some other questions coming in. What is one of the biggest challenges you've have faced, and how did understanding your motivation help you move through it and grow?
Such a good question. Okay. Oh, there's so many. My head has actually just exploded. There's so many, and it's an interesting point, because it's, what do I share with you? So it goes back to the last video, that sort of vulnerability bit. What do I share with you? So there's lots of things. Actually, the one that I'll share with you that actually might give you an in to how this all comes together is around actually, how do you sustain and build, because my ambition is to massively build the business at this time. This is a really difficult time. I'm a single mum of 2 young children who are out in the back garden at the moment. I've got all of that to manage, like we all do. We've all got our dependents, we've all got those sorts of things, and I've got a business that was all face-to-face, delivering to leadership teams, a lot in the charity sector. We know what's happening in the charity sector right now. So it's a really big challenge. And actually, I was already starting to change my business before this, but it's accelerated it. And what's helped is that truly understanding. So let me just take you through the performance triangle. What do I want to achieve? It's on the screen. I want to shift the paradigm around motivation and leadership. I could do that by doing more Zoom calls of training. I took all my training online. So a lot of my peers are doing is they're just taking their training online. No problem, I could do that. That then relates back to skills and behaviours. Do I think I could build courses that are engaging on a Zoom environment? Absolutely. But I'm still not getting the feel for that's what I want to do, because there's something about, I can only reach so many people if I'm just on Zoom calls with intact leadership teams. There's something bigger happening within me, and that bigger piece comes from my motivation. And that's my absolute, I've got 3 motivators. One is one searcher, which is making a difference. I want to make a much bigger difference. So actually just working with individual leadership teams is not big enough for me right now. But I've also got spirit, which is about freedom. I don't want a big team of people. I don't want to manage a big team of people. That's just not me. Bob would be laughing to his motivational maps as well. He'll totally get what spirit's about. It's not me to build a big team of people. I want the freedom. And I'm also a bit of a rebel. I want to do something different in terms of how I build my business. I want to conform to this associate model. So I want to break free from the convention of you just replicate what I do with teams with other people that, do what I do. And also, I've got a 3rd motivator, which is called expert. And by the way, if you've got expert in your profile, you don't think you're an expert at all. But this for me is about really sharing my knowledge and keeping my head in that space of knowing my stuff and sharing my stuff in an applicable way. So if I look at those motivators, it just jumps off the page at me that the way that my business is changing through this COVID crisis is that I go into train the trainer mode. So this is about me sharing the models that we've used for years with leadership teams, but through their learning and development teams. So we're now working with learning and development professionals who have already got loads of resource, but we're adding our models to them. So for example, when we go into a pharmaceutical or big retailer, we inject our knowledge and they're able to use that within their 10,000 staff. Not just the 1 or 2 or 10 teams that I could have touched. So I'm hoping that helps at aligning those 3 elements to get people thinking about how you bring that up to change what you do and having to react really quickly. And why am I doing it so quickly? Because I can't wait. Wanted to have done it before. I'm so excited about it.
Okay, more questions. Thank you. I really love the idea of moving towards motivation-based direction and leadership. Are there any really good ways to establish a good understanding to align motivation-based leadership?
Read my book. The facetious answer is read my book. So I think the formula is through the performance triangle. I absolutely do. I really believe that when you forget about thinking about what traditional models of leadership are, and allow yourself to start experiencing leadership as you want to see it. Start questioning what you're seeing in leadership around you all of the time. So just broaden and be curious about that. And then start allowing that thought process to feed into what does good look like in terms of leadership? What skills and behaviours need to therefore be present in order to deliver on that leadership, and how do you align that through motivation? There are no right motivators, just to be clear. It's about how it aligns. You can lead from any motivation, and the book shows you how to do that. And I think when you confidently stand in who you are and you treat other people as an adult, so you're adult to adult, leader to leader position, then that's when you get motivational leadership, because you're dealing with the person. You're dealing with the energy of that person, the behaviours, the warts and all of that person, and you're truly doing it together collaboratively, rather than this very strange situation that we've had, which is positional power. So I think it comes through that. So but reading, I mean, anything like Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, I mean, there's so many books that I could recommend for you that get referenced again in the book. But yeah, Brené Brown's a great place to start, because it's very much from the inside out. Kevin Cashman as well, who I mentioned earlier, all very much feed into this thinking.
Okay, thank you. Another question: how do you fit this important work into the whirlwind? I struggle to keep up with the day-to-day demands, and when I plan to do not urgent but important work, it quite often gets pushed under the carpet.
Yep. Oh, so hear your pain. It is by being realistic, actually. So that's why I was saying about looking only 6 months ahead, because I think it's overwhelming if you start to think beyond that. By all means, dream beyond that to make sure that the stars are aligned, if you like, but bring your field of vision in a little bit. For me, it is about setting boundaries. So, deciding when you're working and when you're not, and setting out at the beginning of the week. Somebody mentioned planning when we were talking about skills earlier. Planning is so important. There's a quote, is it Eisenhower, that talks about plans. I've always found plans to be useful, but planning indispensable, something like that. And it's that point. So on a Friday, I sit down without fail and I think about what I'm going to achieve over the next week. And then I am really critical, because I over egg what I believe I can do in a week. And I think, but what's the one thing that's going to bring about the results next week? And that's my one thing to do. And then I allow the other ones to be on the list, should I get that done earlier than the end of the week. So focusing on the one thing, and there's a brilliant book that's called The One Thing as well, that's really helped me get that. But so focusing on the one thing, planning as a daily practice, and then setting your boundaries. And explain to the people around you who are wanting your time, stealing your time, that what I need from you right now is to allow me to work till 12 o'clock, and then once that's done, I'll be free too. So you set the boundaries. It's not, no, I'm not going to come and do. It's at 12 o'clock I can come and do. So set those boundaries with people. But be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself.
Oh, yeah. It's important to be kind to yourself in these days. Another question: how would you deal with a situation where you have lost faith in some of your team?
Go back to motivation. For me, it's very easy, and in fact, the traditional thing is when you think, oh, that team member, they're rubbish, they can't do. We think about skills, and we start writing off, and almost coming to the point of resentment. I've seen people just, they're useless, they can't do, and people talk about it in a skill conversation. Actually, the person's not engaged often. So many times it's the motivation. So if you've lost faith in a member of your team, go back to them as a human, adult to adult, leader to leader, and ask from their perspective what they're seeing, what they understand good looks like, what they believe they can contribute to that and what's driving them right now. So that how why bother model, use it from that place to truly listen. And there was, when we were talking about leadership earlier, somebody gave that lovely definition of leadership, which is about knowing when to sit down and listen. That's what you need to do. Sit down and listen to their perspective, and then share your vision and see whether it can align, because it might not be able to, but chances are it can be. In virtually all my experiences, we'd struggle to put a number on it, but certainly over 90% of my experiences, it's not about that person needing to leave. 95% probably not about that person needing to leave. It's about a malalignment, a misalignment between people.
Okay. Kate, we're getting close. In fact, we're
yes,
at 12 o'clock.
I know,
I'm going to squeeze one more question in.
Okay, go on.
If it's
There's a
quick
special
answer.
offer coming afterwards, so don't
As
go.
a middle manager, I need to lead people, but also influence those above me. How do I influence those above me?
In exactly the same way. So when you're setting out your stall, remember I was talking about that earlier, you set your stall out to everybody, 360 degree. So when you're talking to the leaders above you in that traditional model, which I don't hold to, but in that sense, then you're setting out what you understand good to look like, where you're going in terms of your direction and how it aligns. So you set your stall out to them, you hold them to account, you catch them doing it right. So you don't reinforce this inequality that we have on this positional power by thinking it just comes from one direction. You emanate your leadership in every direction, by being really strong, standing really strong in your leadership, and that's every which way. That's what we need to do.
Cool. And to finish up, because it is time to go.
Yes, it is special offer time. So you will get an email. So if you've stayed this long, which is fabulous, and thank you so much for doing that. It makes such a big difference to us too, to know that you're here and engage with us. We'd love to give you access to the Create Motivation resources. So these are the resources that accompany the book. You don't need to have read the book for them to make sense. So right now you can log on to that and you can get the password and go in and start playing with some of the models we've talked about today. What my big offer though is, I've talked about motivation non-stop today, and I am so clear that people don't know what motivates them. I see it time and time and time again. So motivational maps is a phenomenal tool that enables you in just 10 minutes to understand what motivates you. It gives it a language. So seeing as you've stayed so long, we will give you the opportunity to get a motivational map for free, get some online learning to make it make sense for you, and then join a later group webinar so that you can ask your own very specific questions around what you can do with that motivation to let it align to what you're wanting to do at the moment. So that's the big offer. It's worth at least £299. You'll get it for free. And then lastly, anybody that completes the exit survey can get a free 30-minute chat with any of the panelists. As many of us here in the background here, Walter, Richard, Bob, myself, and maybe some others have joined as well. We're all available to you. It's not a sell. It's about giving our time to you because we want you to succeed as well, and we love them. So let us know if you'd like to take us up on that offer.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much, Kate. From myself and the team, that's been wonderful. I'm going to close the webinar now. So talk to everybody very soon.